Hi, Andrew Ferguson from Kensington Wine Market here. I'm here because you want to taste the Rosebank 21-year-old Unity with me. This is the 6th release in the Rosebank The Roses collection from Elixir Distillers. We're thrilled to be the only retailer in Canada to get some of these whiskeys. It's the second last release we're expecting to see to come to Canada from Elixir Distillers. It's bottled at 52.7%. Matured in ex-Bourbon and Madeira casks, and it's a lovely single malt. Before we get to tasting it though, and I've already got mine in the glass here because we want it to start to oxidize, open up a little bit, and I've gone for the old school blender's glass here because I really want to get the full experience of this light, delicate, tropical floral lowland single malt. I want to get as much of it on the nose as I can. So I've gone with that glass to really sort of concentrate and emphasize the nose. So Rosebank Distillery, it is reopening. Rosebank's a distillery that originally opened way back in 1840 is the official founding date, though there are records that seem to show it was operating as early as 1798. And there are others that demonstrate that there was a Rosebank distillery being run in 1817. We're not 100% sure it's the same distillery as the Rosebank distillery opened in 1840, but that distillery did quite well for quite some time. It was a traditional triple distilled lowland single malt, being made very near to the town of Falkirk. But in the 1990s, actually really starting in the 80s, the whiskey industry was going through some tough times. Distilleries like Rosebank were unfortunately shuttered. Rosebank closed in 1993. There was always hopes that it could reopen, and those hopes were kind of dashed in 2002, just before I got into the whiskey industry, as a matter of fact. The distillery, one of the things that made it strong in the 1800s is that it was established along the Caledonian Canal, the Fourth Clyde Canal. The Caledonian Canal's further north. And this canal allowed it to be supplied with barley, ship whiskey out in casks. But the canals kind of fell into disrepair in the 20th century. They went out of use. And Diageo, who owned a huge chunk of the industry at that time, was faced with the decision, which distilleries do we keep open, which ones do we close? And at the time, they had 3 lowland distilleries. They had Bladnoch, they had Rosebank, and they had Glenkinchie. And in the end, Glenkinchie, which had been through some modernization in the years before this period when they shut Rosebank down, it was that's one of the reasons why it's believed that it was given priority. Rosebank needed some serious upgrades to its water treatment plant. I think at the time it was going to cost £2 million. There was also questions about its road access and whether or not it would continue to have road access to the distillery. I used to hear rumors, and I probably helped propagate them back in the early days, that Diageo shut it down because Glenkinchie sounded more Scottish. While in some ways that sounds like something they might do, I doubt that that's really what was behind it. Glenkinchie, I believe, already had a visitor center at this period in time. It had already been selected to be one of the classic malts. And those are probably the real reasons why Rosebank was closed in favor of Glenkinchie. 2002, some of the buildings were sold off. British Waterways took over. They were trying to rejuvenate the canal system, make it something that people could travel on and holiday on, something that's quite popular in the UK. And one of the few surviving distillery buildings was converted into a restaurant. It was others were converted into shops and to flats, but there was a beefeater restaurant. And the reason I know this is that I intentionally went and ate there once, just so I could say I visited the site of Rosebank Distillery. Fast forward to 2017, hard to believe, 6 years ago now, Ian McLeod Distillers, who own Glengoyne and Tamdhu, amongst other things, purchased Rosebank with the intent of reopening it, which is really cool. I think they'd originally hoped to reopen it in 2019, but it took a lot longer to get going than they'd originally hoped. And COVID got in the way, a lot of things got in the way. The boom in distilling that's really made it harder and makes it take longer for distilleries to get new stills and things also adds to that. And the reason why that's key is that at some point between the closure of the distillery and well before the period that Ian McLeod bought it, The stills and everything that were left in the distillery were robbed from it. They were just taken out. Scrap metal, it happens. Anyway, it's a fascinating distillery. It's one that I've always loved. It's always been very light and delicate in style. And it's also a whiskey that I worried would not mature well past a certain age. Now, I suppose that's not something we need to worry about too much if you're maturing it in refill, second fill, third fill casks, because you're going to have the potential for much longer term maturation there. And by all accounts, the Rosebank 30 and 31 that the distilleries put out in the last couple of years have been very well received. But leaving Rosebank in active casks for a long time is not a good idea, because it's just going to simply overshadow the spirit. So what Elixir Distillers did years and years ago with their Rosebank line is they put them in glass, and they're still slowly releasing them over time now. That's why we have 21-year-old Rosebank when the distillery closed 30 plus years ago. So bottled at 52.7%, as I mentioned before, a mix of bourbon and Madeira casks. Let's get to the whiskey and give it a nose and taste. For me on the nose, the thing that strikes me right off the bat is how floral it is. I'm getting this nice waxy, toasty oak tone from it, but it's also like walking into a greenhouse on a hot day if you're going to maybe buy some flowers for your garden in the spring or the summer. Loads of floral tones leaping out of the glass, very toasty, that nice waxy tone there. But it's also decadent. I'm getting notes of Manuka honey. I'm getting some dried apricot, marzipan, but I'm also getting like berry fruits, like a mixed berry fruit compote. Now remember, this was matured in both bourbon and Madeira casks. Madeira cask, which is a fortified wine, I find tend to often add a very spicy component to whiskeys. And that spiciness, it shows a little on the nose, but I don't think it's going to show its full effect until we get to the palate. It's both soft and thick at the same time. I know that kind of seems counterintuitive. The spirit's very light, very soft, but the oak there, that American oak ex-Bourbon and the Madeira casks have added a decadence to it. They've thickened up the palate quite a bit, which is nice. It should be acknowledged too that Rosebank Distillery, despite its triple distilled, very floral profile, did employ worm tubs, which will create a heavier, oilier spirit in that condensation process. So kind of countering that floral, heavily distilled character. Going back on the palate again, yeah, I'm getting something in there that reminds me of like Sauterne or late harvest wine. You know, a little bit sweet, but not incredibly sweet, with some nice structure to it. It's toasty, it's still floral on the palate. The spices are really developing. I'm getting some like notes of like roasted coffee bean in there as well too. The finish, light, fresh, warming and spicy. It does have a reasonably good long finish to it, but with a whiskey like Rosebank, because it's such a light, delicate spirit, unless the oak is really over the top, which you don't want because again, it's so delicate, you know, you're probably going to get a little bit of a lighter finish on it. To me, the American oak is giving it this nice soft, velvety, toasty character. And where that Madeira element is coming in is giving you that like spicy fruit character, really big, rich spices. Wow. It's pretty elegant, fruity, toasty. All in all, a great dram. What else to say about this before wrapping up? First, you're not going to see a lot of 21-year-old Rosebank unless you're buying at auction, because again, most of these whiskeys would have been sold off 10, 15 years ago or more. So it's kind of cool to see an early 20s bottling of Rosebank at this point in time, which is 2023, fully 30 years since the distillery closed. The distillery itself, the owners have been bottling, as I mentioned, 30 and 31-year-olds. But think about this, even if the distillery opens later this year, which all signs suggest it could, or early next, failing that, it's going to be 21, 22 years before they have 21-year-old whiskey again. And it'll be interesting to see, will it be similar to this? Only time will tell, but until then, I hope you enjoyed this little tasting of Rosebank with me. I like doing these even though I don't get to see you and don't get to see who's watching this, but if you're not doing this tasting but are now intrigued, what is he talking about? We are selling samples of this particular whiskey, 25 ml samples, Rosebank 21-year Unity, part of the Rosebank The Roses collection from Elixir Distillers. Information's on our website. Check it out. Thanks for watching. Until next time.